We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Israel goes to war, an RFK announcement, and a Wallet Watch segment. Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lupkin, and here's the news you need to know. Israel on Monday declared a complete siege of the Gaza Strip in the third day of fighting after Hamas militants launched surprise rocket and ground attacks in southern Israel from the Palestinian-controlled territory. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said no electricity, no food, no fuel would be allowed into the Palestinian enclave of roughly 2 million people. We are fighting animals, and we will act accordingly. Israel's unprecedented hostage crisis intensified Monday when Hamas militants threatened to start executing some of the more than 100 Israelis captured in southern Israel unless the government eased its bombardment of Gaza. Any targeting of civilian homes without advanced warning will be met regrettably with the execution of one of the enemy civilian hostages we hold, and we will be forced to broadcast this, said Abu Abaida, spokesperson for Hamas's Al-Qassam Brigade's military wing. The announcement underscored the stakes as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government considers how to continue its three-day-old offensive in Gaza to retaliate for Hamas's weekend surprise attacks. Israel's counteroffensive into Gaza extended through the night, including airstrikes in Gaza City, home to Hamas's centers of government. Israeli warplanes pounded downtown Gaza City with relentless bombardments into early Tuesday after Israel's prime minister vowed retaliation against the Islamic military group that would reverberate for generations. Israel has now stated that their borders are secure. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. told supporters on Monday he would end his long-shot challenge against President Biden for the Democratic presidential nomination and run instead as an independent. While Democrats scrambled to note that Kennedy, son of slain former Senator and presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of assassinated President John F. Kennedy, has prominent Republican backers and shares anti-vaccine views that tie him to Biden's likely Republican opponent, former President Donald Trump, the platform that RFK Jr. laid out was in fact a liberal agenda of increasing taxes on corporations, fighting climate change, and safeguarding the environment. The only issue that RFK Jr. agreed with Republicans on is securing the southern border. Kennedy said both parties fear he'll spoil the election for them. The truth is, they're both right, he said. And for our Wallet Watch segment, we're joined by Chris Calandra of Elliott Wealth Management. Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me today, Eric.
It's always good to have you here. And, last week we had some unusually high job numbers come out. What does that mean for the economy, and what does it mean for the Fed hiking interest rates?
Yeah, that's a good question and a tough one. It's really tricky. If you look at the markets over the last couple of months, using the major market indexes, the S&P 500, the Dow, and so on, they've had a rough go of it roughly since August 1st. And I think part of it is because earlier on, the Fed raising interest rates to bring down inflation, that was kind of the easy part of the game. Everybody knew they had to do it. It was pretty much a clear path. I think now that they drove down inflation a considerable amount, it becomes much more tricky a decision-making matrix. And that has weighed on the market the last couple of months. Should the Fed raise or not raise is a much trickier proposition than a few months ago when it was, should they raise a half a point or 3/4 of a point? So the stakes are higher and the decisions are tougher. So with the great jobs number or surprisingly good jobs number, it, I think, increases the difficulty of the Fed, because the good, strong job market historically, if you read an economic textbook, should be inflationary. But we brought down inflation over this last stretch without harming the job market, which has continued to be pretty good. So I think it's pretty unclear what the Fed should do to tame inflation even more and not do undue harm to the economy. So I think it's really, really a tricky position that the Federal Reserve is in. Let me just add one final point, and this is a little political, Eric, but
All
I
right.
know you're not shy about that. One of the things that's consistently happened for, almost a year now, I don't know exactly how long, but about a year, is the government reports very good job numbers. And then the next month, they revise those
Yep.
numbers down. And the political conspiracy theory, I'm doing air
Right.
quotes, is that it allows the Biden administration to say, hey, look, we got great job numbers. Look at how good Bidenomics is doing. And then they revise them downward the next month. And then often 2 months later, they revise them down even more. But by then, people aren't paying attention, and it's not going to be on your cable news or network news when they do the revisions downward. So I think it's fair to be a little suspect to this really good number, because based on the last bunch of months, it might get revised downward.
Yeah, the last several reports have all been revised downward, and some by quite a lot. So
Yes.
we do need to see that. And of course, the Fed, inflation, while better than it was, has gone back up a little bit. So the Fed is stuck with the problem of how do they tame inflation without pushing the economy into recession? And it's a tough balancing act for them, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's only going to get tougher for them, because they're sort of having to thread the needle already between not harming the economy unnecessarily, hopefully avoiding a recession, which we've successfully done thus far. But the stakes will get even bigger, because you get into next year and you get into the presidential and election season, overlay this really difficult landscape for the Federal Reserve with the political pressures. It is only going to get harder for them from here on out.
Now, of course, a lot of people have pointed to increased government spending as pushing up inflation and making the Fed's job harder. Now we have Congress battling to create a budget for its new year. If conservatives actually get their way and they manage to cut the budget, will that make the Fed's job easier?
Yes, I believe it will make the job of the Fed easier. I believe it's not topic number one that's weighing on the markets and the economy, but I think it's seeping into everyone's mindset that this debt that the U.S. has is getting very serious. Now, we've heard this before, so it's a little like the girl that cried wolf, right? Because you could go back to the Obama administration and you could hear especially Republicans talk about the sky is falling because of the debt, and nothing really bad actually happened. But the acceleration of the debt is very alarming to a lot of people, including me as a citizen. And then the deficit, the amount of revenue bringing in to the US government is at or near all-time highs, but the spending continues to outpace the intake of monies to a point that it is fiscally reckless. And I think a lot of reasonable people, not firebrands on one side or the other, can agree that this just cannot go on. But how you stop it, how you stop these politicians is the tricky part. So long-winded, but yes, I believe if Congress and the administration can demonstrate some financial restraint, I think it would make things modestly easier for the Federal Reserve to negotiate through the difficult position they're in.
Yes, and while the debt has not caused the sky to fall, unlike previous times, we've actually had our debt downgraded by the credit agencies this time.
Yes, and it's the thing that, yes, the amount of debt the US has not hurt us badly. We could debate whether it has put a cap on GDP growth. I mean, there's some really good research out there that indicates countries that have excessive debt can't grow very fast. And over the last generation, the US economic growth output has slowed as compared to previous generations. So there's a lot of research to indicate that there's a relationship between the two. But at some point, you could break something, and the amount of debt, the deficits, and the fiscal irresponsibility, it could be a wham bam, in a moment you have a crisis kind of thing. So far we've kind of skated by, and some people, I think, can get lulled into, well, hasn't been a problem, isn't a problem, don't worry about it, that's a later. But something could happen that all of a sudden it comes to a head, and that will usually be in a very unexpected way, history shows, and it could be epically bad. I'm not forecasting that. I don't go to bed worried at night for some crazy bad event, but it does factor into things, because when you look at these numbers, the government is simply spending way too much money.
All right, that's our Wallet Watch segment. Thanks for being here, Chris. And that's the Raw Naked Truth. You can catch every episode of the Raw Naked Truth at xvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and other platforms that respect freedom of speech. We'll see you next time.